Tell me what's worse than learning all that you led to believe was all horse crap. They distort.
Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. Tonight we will be discussing WWEEVIL Episode 1, Hollywood Hulk Hogan. So this show wasn't entirely what I expected it to be. I expected them to focus a lot on the characters. Instead, it was just kind of like a generic documentary with an extra little bit of focus on the motivations of the character and how fun it is to play the villain, which, I absolutely hate that they put it in those terms. But when it comes to the character of Hollywood Hulk Hogan, it was a complete departure from the Hulkster, the Hulkamaniac. And this was a good episode to watch. I'm not going to give a review. Instead, I'm going to look into some of the things that they said in this episode and how it relates to the character of Hollywood Hulk Hogan. So, they started this episode with David Shoemaker, who is the Masked Man. WWE loves this guy for some odd reason. He's kind of a lightweight wrestling historian. He's a wrestling journalist. And he talked about heroes being idealized versions of ourselves. And this is true. Heroes, there was something that a writer once said. This writer, I think this Professor Geek, he says that human beings can only really write human beings. In other words, even when we write monsters, aliens, or whatever, we're still only writing human beings. So sometimes we write them as things that we will personally be afraid of. Like, a monster may relate to some kind of animal, So like a werewolf, you would write them like a big giant beast or whatever. So when you think about things in those terms that we can only really write ourselves, heroes have to be human, even if they're not human. Superman isn't a human being, but he has all of the human characteristics. He has all of the human emotions, and he is an idealized human being. In other instances, such as an android or a robot, they would be a human being with things missing. For instance, if you watched Dragon Ball Z, you may find like the androids were less emotional than other, human beings. They show fear a lot less. They were more calculating. The Terminator is a good one to show you how human beings write robots. They still look like human beings in a way. They have a skeletal structure. That's part of our fear, is that we will make robots eventually that look so much like people that they will be indistinguishable from people. But ultimately, robots are programmed by human beings, so they're going to eventually have some type of human response to things. And then you idealize it. Robot, the terror of robots is that a creature of pure logic doesn't understand the emotional nuance of being a human being. And all of that was said is to understand that most things are idealized versions of human emotions and human ideas and human concepts. So a hero is an idealized person within that culture. Now that's going to change. This is cultural relativism. I know a lot of people hate that. I hate it too. But it is true. Because some cultures will have heroes who do unsavory things. Like you may have gods who will transform themselves into human beings and trick women into having sex with them. In some cultures that would be rape, and other cultures that would be just fine, hunky-dory, a-okay. But you have to look at it because the hero has to represent the people that the hero is supposed to be the hero of. Thor represents the Norse culture, the people that live in that area. He embodies the values of those people in that area. If he doesn't translate to Africa, that's perfectly fine. He's not meant to. And the heroes of, African societies aren't really going to transfer to Japan. It's only within recent years through, trying to universalize certain things that all of the heroes have been able to reach across cultures, across cultural borders. It's almost like gods. Gods never used to reach across cultural borders. They will almost be this, we had a God for everything. We don't need this idea of a unitary, singular God. So a hero has to be an idealized person within that culture. So Hulk Hogan was that in the United States. You had an idealized Superman, an Ubermensch. Some people, of course, get very triggered by the Ubermensch concept because they think it's, Nazis and all that kind of stuff. But Ubermensch just means Superman, the superhuman. Hulk Hogan was that. He was the guy who embodied all of the American values. I mean, he carried the flag. He had the Christian cross on his neck. Big, muscular, slick talking, everything that you would think, that is Americana. If you look at, let's say, Japanese anime, whenever in China as well, Chinese movies, whenever you see them depicting American boxers or pro wrestlers, there's always big blonde guys. Always big blonde guys. Hulk Hogan, big blonde guy. Say your prayers, take your vitamins, do your trainings. He had these demandments, the work ethic, everything. This is what Hulk Hogan was rooted in. The only way for Hulk Hogan to really turn heel would be to forsake all of the stuff that he had been preaching for a decade. Now, this is the the character I'm talking about here. So when we start saying about the changes, Dr. Phil, who was in this episode, says that it's easier to identify with bad guys because bad guys have flaws and they don't have to be perfect. See, idealized people are often not real. Heroes are often not real people. Just about everybody that you could take as a hero has some type of flaw. For instance, and this is why I kind of have heroes, but I accept my heroes' flaws. For instance, Muhammad Ali was one of my heroes when I was a kid. I was definitely kind of upset to hear that part of his gimmick was to say that other black people were monkeys. He would call black people gorillas or monkeys or stuff like that. He would call his opponents that, you're a big monkey, you're a gorilla, all this kind of stuff. And it would piss these guys off and they would want to kill him, and he talked about another one of my heroes who was Joe Louis. He talked shit about Joe Louis. And I was like, oh man, I can't believe Muhammad Ali did that. But it made sense to me. Muhammad Ali is the kind of guy, he's trying to sell a fight. He's gonna talk as much shit as he possibly can. Joe Louis is just one of the guys who was criticizing him. So he went at Joe Louis. He apologized for it later. And, there's things about the Nation of Islam and them working with the KKK and that kind of stuff. They had conversations. They didn't work together, quote unquote. They had conversations about how best to, for the racist blacks and the racist whites to stay out of each other's way. But I had to accept that Muhammad Ali was flawed. Some people, when they talk about Martin Luther King, for instance, one of the first things you hear is people talk about, oh, Martin Luther King, he was fucking around on his wife and all this kind of stuff. Like the first rule of having a hero is understanding that your hero is probably going to be a human being and they're probably going to mess up something. They probably screwed up something somewhere. As long as a bunch of people didn't die, or a child was molested or somebody was murdered or something like that, I think we're getting off okay. Right? So our heroes have flaws. Sometimes, and this happens a lot with Superman, and it happened to Hulk Hogan in the 90s. Hulk Hogan was so pure. He was such a good guy that people started kind of becoming more and more detached over time. Each new generation of people wanted a hero who was a little bit more flawed, who was a little bit more rougher around the edges, that wasn't as so driven towards values. And in doing that, what you ended up having is Hulkamania, not only because it had been around for so long, it started to sort of detach itself from culture. So Hulk Hogan, all of his things he was trying to do, like utilize Hulkamania in becoming a movie star, it didn't work. The characters and the motivations and his box office attraction, it didn't really continue the way he wanted it to. So it was time for a change. Now, in terms of the character, Hulk Hogan knew he had to forsake everything that he had created in order to be a successful heel. So Hulk Hogan, who was the working class hero of the 80s and early 90s, the slayer of giants, the, protector of freedom and God and country and all this kind of stuff, the hero to small children. He had to flip that. So what he did is he looked at, if you look at the 7 deadly sins, which one would you think Hulk Hogan would be the most interested in? Avarice, the god of avarice, greed. Hulk Hogan turns into, and pride. Those would be the two, greed and pride. Hulk Hogan wanted everything for himself. And then he started to believe that all of the things that he used to say, me and all of my little Hulkamaniacs, the Hulkamaniacs went away. It was all about everything that I did for this business, brother. I built this business. Hulkamania is bigger than pro wrestling, brother. He started putting himself up there. He created this godlike, he had a God complex where he was the God. He was the one that created the business. You're here because of him. He for years preached to the little Hulkamaniacs. I basically raised your children and you boo me. How dare you? Everything became about money and power and material things. And then they talked about this in the documentary, that they changed his look. His look actually changed. Not only was he slimming down already because of the steroid trial and everything, but he changed his beard. And he grew out the stubble, and he dyed it black. So you have this incredible contrast of the old Hulk Hogan with the gold mustache or the blonde mustache, with the new Hulk Hogan with the black dye, with the black dyed beard. And they talked about how it was just visually striking, it was visually dramatic. And I think this was Shawn Michaels that mentioned this. And I thought that was very interesting. And then when it comes to the tights, he went to the long tights. He got away from the trunks, the yellow trunks. He had moved to the tights. Now he's wearing long tights and they got thunderbolts on them. And he's spray painting his boots, and his boots got his face on it. And his NWO tagged everywhere. He's wearing the bandanas. Everything is flipped. Everything is inverted. And we see this, and it's starting to work. And he's now associating himself with the outsiders, the guys who we're going to invade WCW. And if you love WCW and it's your home promotion and that's really what you enjoy, the classic NWA, you're not really that big on Hulk Hogan anyway. That's what WCW's lineage is. WCW's lineage is Ric Flair and Four Horsemen. It's being anti-Hulk Hogan. And then Hulk Hogan brings his New York horse shit over to Atlanta anyway, and it's already not welcome. And now they're coming in and they're bringing in other New York guys, and they're saying they're taking over. So Corey Taylor of Slipknot starts talking about anti-heroes, and he says, in the 90s it became company guys versus the rebels, and the company guys weren't seen as being very cool. The rebels, the mavericks of wrestling were seen as the guys who were cool. And the NWO were anti-WCW. They weren't the company guys. That's the right thing. But I wouldn't call them anti-heroes, though. They straight up villains. There was no reason to be anti-WCW at that point in time. It wasn't like in the WWF where Vince McMahon is a heel and he's utilizing the system and the power of WWF to turn pretty much the entire promotion heel, and it's actively working against the performers. That really wasn't the case at WCW at the time. Bischoff did the one thing that was smart, and he kept WCW as the baby face. That it was the promotion where, the guys did things fairly. So when the NWO had their own pay-per-views, it was NWO rules. They could change the rules whenever they want. They had their own referees, and the referees were crooked. That kind of stuff. That was smart, even though he, thought that it was a bad idea in the long term, because how can you lose if you have your own referees and everything? That's where you don't go that far. But it made sense that the NWO is a crooked organization of greedy people who want to win no matter the cost and want nothing but power. Then it makes sense that they would have crooked referees and they can change the rules on the fly and whatever the case may be. So you started seeing Hulk Hogan flip his values. No longer is it about God and country and loyalty to your friends and the trainings and the vitamins and all this kind of stuff. He's no longer speaking to the working class anymore. Now he's the elite. He's Hollywood Hulk Hogan. He's no longer saying that he's just like you, brother. He's a movie star. He's a television star. He's nothing like you common folk. And that pisses people off. In this documentary, they talked about, how Turner offices were flooded with hate mail after they turned Hogan heel. There were so many people, because he had been such a huge part of their children's lives. There are people who are down and out offended that Hogan turned heel. They were pissed off. And I thought that's great. And looking at the angle of Hulk Hogan, if you look at it from the perspective of character development, being the greatest babyface of all time, essentially. We're just going to say that. I know that there are probably bigger baby faces in territory era. But being the biggest babyface of all time on a national scale opened up the opportunity for him to be the biggest heel. But in order to do that, he had to sacrifice all of the values that created why he was the biggest babyface in the first place. And he did it and had no problem doing it. He became a coward. Hulk Hogan used to never back down from a fight. Hollywood Hulk Hogan always looking for a reason to get out of a fight. Hollywood Hulk Hogan actually lost a lot more than people remember he lost too. He used to lose non-title matches pretty much all the time, and he would lose on Nitro on TV, and that sort of stuff made things different. He was a beatable champion too, where people wanted to see him get beat, and he was beatable. And then to continue the Hollywood persona, he did, again, the inverted thing that he did before, where he basically just did a bizarro world of the Hulkster. When he was the Hulkster, he was good friends with Mr. T. Mr. T was B.A. Baracus on the A-Team. And B.A. Baracus was a hero. He was a tough guy. When he's Hollywood Hulk Hogan, he's hanging out with Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman is a weirdo. Dennis Rodman is a guy who wears a dress. He's wearing makeup. He's the maverick of the NBA. And, now this guy's hanging out with Hulk Hogan. And you can even see Dennis Rodman isn't a favorite of, I would guess, Southern wrestling fans. Why would they like Dennis Rodman? There's nothing about Dennis Rodman and his values that they would appreciate outside of he's a good basketball player. He is a absolute degenerate human being. So they're kind of like, ugh, like Hulk Hogan hanging out with this guy now, and they did a really good job of creating these workman-like characters in order for Hulk Hogan to feud with, like the Lex Lugers and the Stings. Even though Sting was more of a mythical, cartoonish type character. But Diamond Dallas Page was a big one for WCW at the time. And they did a really good job of that. And so when you digging into the Hulk Hogan character, you can see that, the story is Hulkamania, eventually got too big for the Hulkster. And Hulk Hogan became impure. And he became corrupted at some point. The dangling thread of power over his head became too much, brother, and he reached out and he grabbed it, and he became this corrupt version of Hulk Hogan, Hollywood Hulk, and he forsaked everything that he had once stood for, and in his corruption, and they bypassed his redemption story in WCW. Because I guess they figure it didn't matter. But they did have a Hulk Hogan redemption story in WCW. I don't remember it that well. But they did have his redemption story there. Instead, what they did in the documentary is they went to his match with The Rock. Even after he tried to murder The Rock, the people of Toronto loved Hulk Hogan. And it was through their love and appreciation. It was almost like an anime. Through their love and appreciation, Hulkamania was reborn. Hulk Hogan, he's hawking up. It's back. the Hulkster is still in there somewhere, and the crowd is drawing the Hulkster out at WrestleMania 18. We got to bring the Hulkster out. And Hollywood Hulk loses. You know, the god of avarice. He falls short. He loses. And he humbles himself. You know, this is why I believe that Hulk Hogan being defeated and putting his hand out is a top WrestleMania moment. That was the humbling of Hollywood Hulk Hogan. He ceases to be Hollywood Hulk Hogan at that point. You know, the heel version of Hollywood Hulk Hogan. And he shakes The Rock's hand and admits defeat. Finally. You know, and that he can't do it anymore. And Hulk Hogan says himself near the end of the documentary that he finally started to understand what Hulk Hogan meant to people. And, you know, it was a very special thing for him to see that he can be the biggest babyface of all time and the biggest heel of all time. That he could be a versatile character. Now, we know as wrestling fans and people who have read books like me, Hulk Hogan has worked heel most of his career. It wasn't really until the AWA and his WWE run that he was really much of a babyface. You know, when he was a huge heel in Montreal long before he went to WWE. You know, the WWF rather. He was a big star as a heel in Montreal. So he knew he could work heel. It wasn't a matter of, oh, I didn't think I could ever work heel. Nah, he knew he could work heel. It was just all about whether he was willing to risk the financial rewards of being a babyface on, you know, and sacrificing all of the video games and the lunch boxes and all of the stuff that he was making money off of being the Hulkster. You're not going to sell that stuff if you're a heel, right? But he was wrong. He probably made more money turning heel than he did anything else. So the episode was really good. They went too much into the WCW backstage, creative control, all that kind of stuff. I guess they were trying to say that, you know, it was starting to affect Hogan as a real person. They was trying to blur the lines as, oh, this is Hogan as a real person. And they did that a lot during this series as, you know, hey, this is how the real person and the character interacted. And Hogan was on TV abusing his power and authority. And he was also abusing his power and authority in the back. And I was just kind of like, I don't care about this. I like talking about the character and talking about the character and his motivations. And the motivations for Hulk Hogan is that he felt unappreciated. You know, the crowd had started to boo him in WCW. They weren't supporting him as much as they had been. And he's like, you you could stick it, brother. I love it. Hollywood Hulk Hogan. Absolutely fantastic. But if you watched this episode of WWEEVIL, what did you think? Let me know in the comment section below. Like, share, and subscribe. And I will talk to you guys later.
Your skin tone, so why attach yourself and piggyback the wealth you didn't earn or lack yourself? I'm telling you to own up to your own success and failures. It's a reason why these sleeves